And that's essentially what is the core of the debate currently in EU. That's the crux of the issue. We either can discuss meaningful ways in which we can increase the stabilization function at the central level and have some insurance for these major risks in development, in education, things like that, in science, also innovation, and then pension, health, and so on, so that in a way it doesn't really matter whether you're born German or Greek. That would be a huge advantage, in my opinion, but we are not there anywhere near that. But these are like issues, either that, or eventually you will have to think about what are the alternative ways in which you can supply these three public goods that I mentioned. We currently do not have an alternative that looks as if it will supply or it will guarantee security, justice, and welfare in the sense of this convergence process that I mentioned. As long as you don't have these alternatives, eventually you will have to debate this further augmenting of the structure of the EU. So that's the second point. The third point is about democracy, because obviously this whole debate has to be democratically decided one way or another. And this is where this last election comes in. What you have now as a choice in some countries is basically to go back to what we used to know as proper nationalist approach to managing political and economic issues in Europe. It's interesting to see that this is not a uniform picture. We are talking about countries that are deliberating within these countries themselves what they actually want to do. And one would be the UK, the other would be France, and in some sense, most interesting are former Austro-Hungarian duo, Austria and Hungary, with a very strong right-wing factions in both of these countries. And when you see what is bothering these people, this is essentially free trade, immigration, and human rights. So that's basically what is bothering the right-wing extremism. I'm putting Greece aside, which is the only country that really has also a very strong left wing. Very rare thing in Europe now to have a strong left wing quasi-extremism, whatever you call it. Mostly these are countries with a very moderate left and right-wing parties. So this is, I think, the main challenge. I find it actually reassuring that these people, well, not Nigel Farage, that's a separate topic, but these European people are actually trying to take over, to get seats in the European Parliament, which in my mind, hopefully, will increase the debate in the European Parliament. And that, I think these people like Strache and like Jobbik and like Marine Le Pen, they need to be included somewhere. It's probably better that they are included in the European Parliament and try to argue to the European audience what exactly is it that they offer to Europe, apart from what they offer and cannot really sell to their domestic audiences. So I would actually see this election as an opportunity for more democratic debate in Europe rather than as a big setback. I'm putting aside the UK question, which is a very complex one for a variety of reasons. So that's the third point. The fourth point point is the security issue, and then I stop because I'm already at the end of my time and I'll have enough opportunity afterwards. But I want just to make one point. The importance of the EU as EU is that it's really not a geopolitical player at all. The EU actually is, in a sense, indeed, a Kantian idea, which is that you do not have enemies within countries that are members, and more importantly, you cannot have an enemy-friend relationship with countries outside of the EU. So EU cannot be a geopolitical player versus, let's say, a country like Russia, because first of all, there are no instruments for geopolitics on the European level. So all that debate in my mind is completely misguided when it comes to what EU can or cannot do in various places. It is certainly true, and you can see it in the Balkans, we'll get to talk about that, that if you look at the Balkans, the EU has proven itself not to be a geopolitical player at all. Otherwise, this thing here in the Balkans would have looked much more different than it looks now. So that's, in a way, a plus and a minus. It's a limitation. This is not a state. It is not a defense state. It is not a state with foreign policy and military arm. That's not what it is. So it cannot play, in that sense, geopolitical function. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks for bringing these 4 lines of different argumentation and as well really complementing the picture. Before I open the floor for questions and comments, I would like to give a chance to Hans-Jürgen and Piotr to reflect on what they heard and as well chip in with their own insights on what's happening in Europe today. So,
I have 5 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I try to be a tough chair in terms of time so that you also have a chance. Please.
No, it's always interesting even for me to listen to my colleagues here. But I just want to, I mean, while I understand the way of argumentation of Vladimir Igorov, that the EU is no geopolitical player, I have to say the EU is, despite everything, in some extent a geopolitical player, because for various reasons. First of all, for its economic size. We are the biggest partner of world trade, but we're not aware of that. And we don't have to be aware of that. Others are smaller and are aware of that very thoroughly. And second point is the EU in its periphery is acting with a certain centrifugal power. That means the EU works and sucks in those countries in its periphery because of its economic success and of its political success and of its attractive system to the outside. Right now has been the inauguration ceremony of the new elected Ukrainian president. He made very clear that Ukraine will, despite former attempts by the former President Yanukovych, will have an active look to the European Union. And I interpret this that he couldn't say everything, but in my opinion, there is no way out to no obstacle, no objective obstacle on the long term that Ukraine will be once a member state of the European Union. There are too many other factors around. And when people think about political visions, they used to think in the present state dimension, but they have to think in a way and means dimension. That means if they would calculate that Ukraine should be a member of the European Union, let's say they would have to switch on their mind 10 years ahead That means also in a possible post-Putin era and so on. What will be then with Russia? All these variables will have to function in, and of course we would have then to play with the crystal ball you've mentioned before, but there are elements which can be realized, and if no one has a political vision, then we can bury ourselves immediately. I mean, then it's not worthwhile to have an active life and so on. But let me just say that and regarding the question of soft power and hard power, the European until now is a soft power par excellence, and but we are starting to be in a selected field also as a hard power, not at home, but maybe in some regions in the world where there is unrest, and then there is kind of objective unrest with heavy violations of human rights. So, for example, in Mali, on the République Centrafricaine, in Central Africa, or wherever, and Somalia, and so on, so far, these have not been the last issues where the European Union would have to see what they can do, because if they do it together, it's first of all much cheaper and much more efficient than if one alone does it. This is the new thinking in the European Union, for instance, in defense issues, if I may come on this immediately, that, for instance, in the Baltic Sea, people think now loudly that why does every country of NATO or so need minesweeping ships? Couldn't that be done mainly, let's say, by the Polish? Couldn't be the air defense? Couldn't that be a matter of Denmark and Germany? So there is something going on, because if you think what is spent in military defenses and what double expenditures are effectuated, then it is compulsory to think in the future. And like for instance, there are right now thinking approaches in combining embassies in third countries. I mean, there have been some tests. But why not put all the EU embassies in one super embassy, where everyone is who wants to be there is there, but with a special reporting duty and so on and so forth. That would save billions. That would save a lot of billions, and there are right now going on the first attempts to calculate how much that would be saved. So I just want to mention in the invitation, the program here, there are some questions which are provocative, and as such they cannot be left contradicted, and I'm here to contradict. It's written, the failure of Europe to give clear, effective and socially acceptable answers to the crisis is having a deep political impact, feeding rising populism, Euro-scepticism and political extremism. So it is, what is Europe? The failure of Europe, the failure of Europe. Europe is of course the whole. Is it, by the way, the Europe of the Council of Europe or the Europe of the European Union? So one must be careful, and it's not enough differentiating. The failure of Europe, if you reduce it to the European Union, of course, the failure of Europe is where Europe fails to act in a common way. And this is due to the Council of Ministers, only to the Council. It is not the Commission. They really try hard. It is not above all the European Parliament. They also would have a vote, and then the policy is defined. That's very easy with them. but it is the Council of Ministers. And although this is an EU institution, it is sometimes diametrically to the interests of the European Union. It is the instrument of national egoism, full stop. And as such, it cannot be put into a desert, but it would have to be reformed. The question that we still have now, a lot of unanimous votes in the council, and they all have to be thought over, because one country can block a lot of progress in that field then, and we're coming now in a situation where the European Union thinks about integrating all the Balkan countries, and there is no doubt that this will be done. The question is only when, and this depends on two things. One thing is the absorption capacity of the European Union, which is the smallest point, but the second point is the adjustment capacity of the Balkan countries, which is a matter of time, of course, because you cannot say the countries can come now immediately or so. This has to be prepared, and on an average it took until now 7 years per country. And in the case of the Balkan countries, partly also even more. Some countries like Montenegro may be quite far, but on the other hand, they have a basic character, namely corruption, and this cannot be wiped out that fast in that case, for instance. So the Commission has made some unofficial calculations already 7 years ago that the Balkan countries could join the European Union in a time frame between 2018 and 2021. Right now it's still 2018, but this is a little bit unrealistic. And above all, it depends if they would join as a bloc or if they would join one after the others. Probably we will end up in 2 or 3 small blocks with Bosnia as the last country coming because of their constitutional landscape. But in my opinion, this is realistic, and in that case, the Balkan countries will come once to the European Union. Now, if the Balkan countries come to the European Union, the EU will increase, I think, for 5% of its citizens, but it will increase for almost 30% of its member states. So the veto must be watered down somehow until that time, and they are thinking of doing this indeed. Historically speaking, the European Union is progressing step by step, and there's no linear increase of everything, but this is like the Echternach jumping procession. This is a little town in Luxembourg where once a year there is a big procession and thousands of spectators come from all the countries around, and they are jumping 2 steps ahead, 1 step behind, 2 steps ahead, 1 step behind. But if you look at that, it proceeds anyway. And although there are some setbacks, and this is exactly the same thing as with the European Union. So the Balkan states, there is no doubt for me, will be in the European Union sometime, and maybe not in a linear way, because generally speaking, except the introduction of the euro, where nobody could understand any furthermore that, of course, in the European Union, everything ends up later in a different way and with different people, but it will end up as scheduled, as planned, not as scheduled, but as planned. And this is one of the surprises if you talk to third countries about how the EU acts, how the EU functions. It functions anyway. And now with 28 countries, it is a kind of miracle that it functions, and that shows that despite all differences in language, in political culture, and so on and so far, we have a very high common interest, which has to be taken care of, which has not to be neglected, and we have a high degree of common political culture. And if you see this, I think that there is no favor of Europe, especially not of the integrated institutions, like the Commission or the European Parliament, etc., to give clear, effective, and socially acceptable answers to the crisis. I mean, to the crisis. We always had the saying of the Euro crisis. There was no Euro crisis, never at all in the European Union, because the Euro moved as scheduled, as foreseen. There was a financial system crisis, or a financial or a state budget or state debts crisis, but no Euro crisis. And as Vladimir said before, to get out of the Euro is the worst answer. We have also in Germany a Euro-skeptical party with 7%, which is now in the European Parliament. They got their votes from everywhere, and they are called Alternative für Deutschland, Alternative for Germany. These are elderly gentlemen from the academic world, mainly, these three attributes, and they will not change the world. Democracy has to cope with them, and we will survive, and Europe above all will survive. And while first, in the height of the financial crisis, they were campaigning to that Germany should go out of the euro, that 2 euros should be introduced, and all kind of rubbish. They say we are excited by the European thought as a principle, but the only thing is we want to get out of it. We want to get maybe out of the euro, and so everybody says something different, and they suffer of the same syndrome as all the right-wing or ex-right populist parties suffer right now. They cannot work together. They do know what they refuse, what they reject, but they do not know what they are in favor of, and this is their structural problem. So, I could go now, and in many of these things here, for instance, the popularity of the EU today across Europe is at an all-time low. This is not true. I mean, Europe can be unpopular, some people don't like it, but the popularity of the EU is still prevailing. I'm a member of Team Europe. This is an expert pool for the European Commission, DG Communication, and as such, before the European elections, I've been in several countries, of which they thought I mastered the local language. I've been in several countries, and I never had the impression that people are against Europe. I mean, some of them are against, like in France, Front National, but not the voters as such. It's just the party heads and some of the voters, of course, but the people have not voted for Marine Le Pen because she was so beautiful or whatever. They have voted because they were fed up with Hollande and with the UMP and so on, so they wanted an alternative. And the European election is a 1A opportunity to kick in the butt of the topical government, the present government, without having concrete damage. So the people did that because the European elections can be a kind of punishment possibility towards the government. They have a certain by-election function, as in the United Kingdom, which are usually used to destroy government ranks by some by-election results. I could go now for everybody here for 7 hours, like Fidel Castro before the Kanma meeting or Leonid Brezhnev before the Supreme Soviet. I think I stop here and I will look forward to many of your questions to react on. Thank you.
Thanks, Hans. And talking about adaptability, I think you adapted very quickly to the Macedonian 5 minutes. We are very flexible in that term. But more importantly, I think you brought up a lot of issues, both on the issue of Europe and the structure and what the sentiment is. And I hope I saw some of the organizers. I hope that they were taking notes at your at the way how that was constructed in there. On the issues of the foreign policy, I think you touched upon on the issue of the periphery and the centrifugal power. I really would ask you and the rest to hold your thoughts. I mean, because of later I think there will be a lot of interesting points to raise, both when it comes to the eastern neighborhood and Russia, and as well when it comes to the Balkans. Piotr, you come from the broader Europe, the Council of Europe, and that was mentioned a couple of times as well, from one of the sort of strongest democracies in Europe, from Poland, yourself, and definitely a democratic champion in Eastern Europe. So, your reflections on your quick reflections on the current state of affairs within the European Union and Europe.
I hope I can be brief after having heard so many interesting ideas from my co-panelists. First general observation, crisis, and we start all our conversations on Europe from the recent crisis. We can dispute whether it is over, what was the impact, etc. But the general observation is that the crises no longer play the role of midwives of the future. There is an expectation even that in crisis developments accelerate and we suddenly can use the crisis to see the future. But it's another crisis in this century, starting from security crisis of 9/11, the financial crisis 2007, another crisis which essentially ends without giving us a sense where we are going. There are probably three options, three gears. There is the reverse gear, which is the main preoccupation probably in all these discussions, the rise of nationalistic anti-European parties and the possibility, at least theoretical possibility, of reversing, if not slowing down, the process of European integration. And by the way, this reverse gear is advocated not only by openly anti-European people, but when you remember the book written by Francois Heisbourg, who is a pro-European guy, but he advocated the idea of putting the Euro project on hold, exactly to save Europe. This book, La fin du rêve européen, is based on the idea, if you want to save Europe, you have to go back, you have to retreat. So it's not only about anti-European guys, but also very pro-European people who save Europe. Yes, that's what Francois Heisbourg said. But there are other guys who essentially say, let's slow down, let's take a break, because we can kill Europe, even if we want very much. But even if you look at the anti-European camp, the picture, as we discussed yesterday, is not so white and black. Because out of 6 biggest EU countries, in 3 of them, in the recent elections, the anti-European forces were clearly defeated. It is Germany, it is Italy, it is Poland. Anti-Europeans were defeated. So our whole panic is essentially motivated by what happened in France and in the UK. There are different explanations why it had to happen this way, but 2 factors are quoted explaining the rise of anti-European feelings. First, the lack of growth. And people say, look at Germany, Poland. If you have growth, you have no anti-European sentiments. So the lack of growth, and the second, diversity, or the incapacity to deal with the problem of migrants. I think the problems are deeper. There is a third factor, which I think is present in France and UK. It's hidden somewhere. It is the fact that these big countries are losing their understanding of their role in Europe. They are realizing that they are no longer in the driver's seat, which I think can play a psychological role, even if not articulate. The second possibility is a neutral gear. It's what essentially the Dutch several months ago suggested. We